Pluribus episode 4 takes everything that has been slowly building over the last few chapters and finally pushes it into full chaos. The story shifts from emotional tension and world building to a much more confrontational, experimental, and morally messy episode. It keeps the same eerie tone that the show has been known for, but this week the stakes feel a lot more personal. The episode focuses heavily on Carol, her trauma, her distrust of the hive-minded joined, and her desperate attempts to find answers even at the cost of hurting others. But this episode also introduces a new human outlier. Manousos Oviedo, who isn't part of the hive and might actually hate them even more than Carol does. Everything that happens this week deepens the complicated conflict about free will, connection V's, isolation, and the ethics of resisting a collective world where nobody lies and everyone is unified. It's one of those episodes where you understand every character's motivations, but still feel uneasy about how far they go. The episode opens far away from Carl's immediate storyline, taking us to Paraguay, where we finally meet Manousos Oviedo in person. We heard him before during his shouting match on the phone with Carol last episode, but now we see his life up close. He's holed up alone in an office of a storage facility, windows blocked, scavenging whatever food he can find while obsessively scanning radio frequencies to find signs of anyone who's still human like him. His survival feels desperate but principled. He refuses food from the joined and would rather starve than accept help from a group he believes is no longer human. It's very Charlton Heston in the Omega Man energy, one man holding onto his identity even if it kills him. He eventually breaks and digs through storage units for food, but even then he leaves apology notes for the renters like he still expects society to return. It's such a tiny moment, but it shows that he's not just paranoid, he's trying to preserve some moral line that keeps him human. When Carol first calls him, he assumes she's one of the joined because she's being overly polite. Only when she calls him back and curses at him does he finally realize she might actually be like him. This makes their future meeting not just plot relevant, but emotionally meaningful, that they're two people resisting the entire world, driven by fear and principle, but also loneliness. Meanwhile, in Albuquerque, Carol is still dealing with the aftermath of last episode's grenade chaos and Zosia's injury. Since her normal car has been trashed, she casually steals a police cruiser because ownership doesn't mean much anymore when everyone acts as one collective consciousness. She returns home to find a crew repairing the damage, including the mayor and a man named Larry Jeff Hiller, who becomes an important subject of Carol's tests. Carol is trying to figure out if the joined can lie. She treats them almost like lab subjects rather than people, and Larry becomes the perfect test case, mostly because he's cheerful, helpful, and genuinely kind. When she asks him what he thinks of her books, he praises them enthusiastically, even comparing them to Shakespeare. It sounds absurd, but it's sincere because the joined evaluate things based on emotional impact. Carol's books helped people feel better in dark moments, so to them that makes her a meaningful cultural figure, even if the writing isn't technically brilliant. But when she asks what her late wife Helen really thought of her work, Larry is forced to say Helen only found her novel fine and didn't even finish it. Helen lied to protect Carol's feelings while she was alive, but the hive is incapable of lying, so now the truth comes out raw and painful. This confirms Carol's theory, the joined can't lie even if honesty hurts. It's a breakthrough, but it also pushes Carol further into her obsession. Zosia, recovering in the hospital, he becomes Carol's next target for truth-seeking. Even though Zosia is part of the hive, she still acts warm, affectionate, and understanding toward Carol, which makes what happens next even more tragic. Carol asks whether there's a way to reverse the joining, and although Zosia refuses to answer directly, her inability to lie basically confirms that a cure exists. Like most of the hive, Zosia argues that Carol is judging something she hasn't experienced. The joined understand both sides, life alone and life connected, while Carol only knows isolation. It's a valid argument, yet Carol refuses to consider it. To her, joining feels like forced conformity, similar to the conversion therapy camp her mother forced her into at age 16. The comparison is emotional, not literal, but it explains why Carol responds so violently to any form of forced unity. Even if the hive is peaceful and loving, she sees it as erasure. At this point, Carol decides to run her own experiment. She gets sodium thiopental truth serum from a pharmacy and first tests it on herself. Under the drug, her real feelings come out. She hates the hive, doesn't like Zosia beyond sexual attraction, and misses Helen deeply. The scene is raw, human, sad, and messy. But instead of stopping there, she drugs Zosia next. This is where Carol crosses a major ethical line. She takes Zosia out of the hospital and pressures her aggressively while she's under sedation, hoping she'll reveal the cure. But Zosia is already physically weak, and the drug interacts badly with whatever medication she's on, sending her into cardiac arrest. The hive crowds around, crying out in unified pain, and Carol handcuffs herself to Zosia, terrified that they'll take her away before she gets answers. It's the darkest moment of the series so far. Carol demanding her agency while violating someone else's. When she finally realizes the hive will let Zosia die if Carol wants that, she backs down and lets them try to save her. But it may be too late. Zosia has already been through so much, and this injury isn't just a physical consequence, it's a moral turning point. Carol isn't a hero resisting assimilation anymore. She's someone hurting others to protect herself. At this point, the audience is torn. We understand why Carol resists. The infection threatens identity and autonomy. But after several episodes of hurting Zosia, it's hard to justify her actions. Zosia might be part of a collective, but she has still shown empathy, curiosity, and kindness. And yet Carol sees only the threat, not the person. The ending leaves Zosia's fate uncertain and also sets up a future storyline where Carol may have to face the consequences of her own fear. What makes this episode powerful is how it shifts the theme from us vs them to questions about who gets to define freedom. If the Hive offers happiness and unity, is rejecting it noble or selfish? If the Hive removes individuality, is joining it progress or erasure? And if a cure exists, who gets to decide whether the world should stay unified or return to painful individuality? Carol thinks she's fighting for human freedom, but she may be driven by pain, not principles. Manousos, on the other hand, resists from a place of strict ideology and survival, but he hasn't met Carol yet. Their union might become either a partnership or a disaster, and the show is clearly building toward their meeting. This episode closes not with resolution, but with looming conflict. Someone is going to fight back against the Hive in a much bigger way, and this episode feels like the turning point. The entire episode examines experiments done outside control, the ethics of truth, and the philosophical clash between individual agency and collective harmony. It shows that even honesty can be dangerous when forced, and connection can become oppression when there's no option to say no. The joined believe they have evolved beyond pain and loneliness, but Carol sees that evolution as the death of humanity. Meanwhile, the Hive mind isn't malicious, just overwhelmingly sincere. So sincere that Carol's violence crushes them emotionally. The episode ends with no clear villain, just clashing worldviews, which makes the story even more unsettling. If Manousos and Carol eventually unite, the Hive might face a rebellion it can't emotionally comprehend. If Zosia dies, Carol may lose the last person who still treated her with warmth despite her resistance. And if a cure exists, someone will eventually try to use it. Episode 4 leaves us with a world on the edge of a moral war. Not humans vs aliens, but forced connection vs painful individuality. The question isn't which side is right, it's whether either side can exist without destroying the other. And the episode closes with one final reminder: Carol may be fighting to stay human, but the cost of that fight might turn her into something much darker.